Hello, everyone. To the couple of you who are here early, um, we are going to wait till the top of the hour to get started. So we appreciate your patience as we get everybody set up. Thank you for joining.
Welcome, everybody. We'll be starting in about 10 minutes here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your attendance.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining. We have kind of accidentally started the webinar a little early, so we just have a handful of attendees who can hear and see us now.
Okay.
Just wanted to give you a heads up. And for those attendees that are here with us early, thanks for joining early. We are going to wait until the top of the hour to get started. You know, Jim, you look great, and Tom, you look great. Can hear and see you guys both very well. The slide deck's ready. So yeah, just hang tight, and we'll start with everybody here in 8 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, everybody. We'll be starting the webinar in 5 minutes. Okay, Jim, we're just about the top of the hour. Before we start, how'd you do on today's Wordle?
Doing well, Tom, and you?
I'm doing well. I got the Wordle in 3 today.
Awesome.
Good. Well, it's the top of the hour. I think that we'll just roll right into it. So I want to welcome everybody. I'm Tom Farmer, Chief Investment and Corporate Development Officer with MCT. And today I have the great fortune to bring to our webinar series Jim Deitch, best-selling author, CEO, and founder of Terra Verde, and also has a lot of letters past his name, CPA, CMBA, others, I'm sure. Jim, welcome to the MCT Terra Verde webinar.
Pleasure to be here, Tom. Thank you so much.
Yeah, today we're gonna talk about effective cost management, the power of effective cost management in a rapidly contracting market. Nobody's enjoying the rapid contraction in the market. Every basis point matters now, but this is a webinar on how to win. And this is why, on average, MCT clients perform better than the market as a whole. We continue to deliver to our clients and our prospective clients valuable information from some of the leading minds in the mortgage industry. Jim, great to have you with us. Let's talk about that current market. And MBA is continuing to reduce their estimates on volume for the year and going into next year. Volume pressure is one thing. What else are we seeing?
Well, I think Tom, you hit it on the head. And if it's okay, I just might share a couple of slides to kind of frame the current market from some of the data from the MBA, some other sources. But if it's okay, maybe we'll just take a quick look.
Let's jump into it.
Okay. So what you're looking at is a slide that shows that operational productivity has been falling since 2003. And this is a slide from Mike Frattoni. The gold line is underwriter productivity, number of files decisioned in a given month. The line just in line with that is closer productivity, and the line in the bottom is processor productivity. So as we see, productivity has been an issue in the last couple months, but it's really something that has subsisted for the last 20 years. We just have not been able to engineer the productivity into the process. Let's just look at the last 8 quarters. And to me, and Tom, love your perspective on this, this is a stunning graph. And in 2019, the yellow bars, the gold bars, are the number of files in a given month for a fulfillment or operational person. You'll see on the left-hand side, before the third quarter of 2020, operational productivity was 20–25% higher than the dark bars, the maroon bars, which is sales productivity. So that's how many files per loan officer, how many files for the total fulfillment employees. But something happened in 2020 in the third quarter. Those productivity numbers kind of swapped, such that operational productivity and sales productivity actually reversed themselves, with operational productivity being a little worse. And it's continued for the last 8 quarters, and in fact, it's down 50%.
Yeah, that's a pretty dramatic fall, and certainly, something that all business owners should be aware of and tracking. That productivity decrease is a little bit of a head scratcher, given the technology that we've thrown to increase productivity, but perhaps there are other reasons to explain that, including our new models of work from home or hybrid, or perhaps that attributes to it. But what other elements would you say are factors in that decline of productivity?
Well, Tom, it's a great question. I mean, certainly people were putting a lot of overtime in and worked really hard during the refinance boom periods. But the thing that just is hard for me to fathom is that in the second quarter of 2019, it was about 5.5 files per fulfillment employee. The second quarter of this year, it's 4. And work from home might have something to do with it, but it's probably more related to process. And I'll show you just one other element here that to me is just, I think, the key issue. Compensation is 68% of the cost to produce a file. And this data comes from the MBA Mortgage Banking Performance Report. And that 68%, as you can see in this graph, has been constant. It's been that way for 10 years. That tiny little orange sliver you see there is technology spend. The Yeah, so the cost per loan has doubled in the last 10 years, from $5,000 to $11,000. And 34% of that 11,000, or roughly $3,700, is operational it's operational people. And despite the fact we've invested in some technology, think about an industry that spends almost 20 times more in people cost than it does in technology. And the technology we do have doesn't necessarily come through in a way that produces productivity. So I think it's a little bit of a mindset. It's also a little bit of technology has not been widely adopted and maybe not as integrated as it could. So Tom, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, certainly that 68% is a little bit of an eye opener on even though it's remained flat on the cost to originate, and certainly seems like that would give you some opportunity to improve that over time, or improve performance on your personnel spend, especially as volumes compress in that. So yeah, this is a really interesting chart, and the underspend on technology and the impact on efficiency is both, they're both underwhelming.
Yeah, and Tom, I'd like permission of you and our audience just to be just very, very blunt and direct, because if you think about an industry where we spend 2/3 of our cost in personnel and our volume is cut in half, I'd like everyone to just realize we're not suggesting here a slash and burn, but what we are suggesting is a very hard look at productivity, that one really considers productivity in the light of where we are, and essentially like to spend the remaining 30 minutes or so before questions just to talk about effective productivity management, how you win. And there's three things we're going to spend some time on. The first is, go ahead, Tom.
No, I was going to say, perfect. You asked about permission. I think this is an existential matter for clients to understand, and prospective clients. Perfect. It can be a bit of a difficult conversation, but I think it's important to hone in on where you're getting bang for your buck operationally, and how to tighten it up, because as we said, every basis point matters.
So all the ideas you're going to hear actually came from C-level people in the industry. I write a fair amount. I talk to a lot of people, and really appreciate those on the call and those not on the call that have contributed to kind of the thought process of some of the things that we're going to talk about. So the first is to really focus on profits, because volume's not an option. The market's going to give you what it's going to give you. The forecasts from MBA are not necessarily rosy, but it is possible. It is possible to be profitable in this market. The second is transparency and visibility is something that I think is just necessary. It's hard to have a conversation about productivity without having a fact base. And lastly, this gets back to the bluntness. It's my view that we as lenders have to commit to action right now. We can't give back a lot of the profits from 2021, 2020. I was with a group of correspondent lender executives, and to a person, they said that roughly 60% of their correspondent sellers were unprofitable in the second quarter, and they have started the process of profitability waivers, but with constraints. So this is an existential issue. So let me give you a theory of how you might address this as lenders. And the first piece is that you're looking at the MBA's mortgage banking profitability report for the second quarter. And at the bottom, you'll see in that little white number in parentheses that 5 basis points. On average, that's what the industry lost for independents and bank-owned mortgage bankers. Total compensation was 228 basis points. So again, just being blunt, trying to cut it out of technology costs or occupancy costs. Other direct includes all outsourced services. So rebidding the cost of the shred bins, looking at Wall Street Journal subscriptions, not to be snide, but that's not going to do it. The number you really have to focus on is compensation. I did talk to a couple of CEOs and said corporate overhead should be in there too, and they said, yeah, you're actually right, as long as it doesn't touch my department, but that's a different story.
It's important, recognizing this, the source of the cost there and the compensation costs. But Jim, it's cutting into your company or reshaping your company. It can be risky. It can be sort of personality driven. How do you make it more of a logic or data driven approach to it?
Tom, that's a great question, and what I'll do is just use a thesis on that data drivenness and say, and this is actually work we did with several lenders. The numbers are anonymized, but the concept is the same. The lenders said, look, we want to make money, so what do we got to do? Looking at the actual results, said, look, we got to take some dollars out of compensation cost. In this case, this particular lender said 20 is the target. And the thought process was, let's get 8 basis points out of sales personnel cost and 12 basis points out of operational cost, just as a working thesis. So 20 basis points improvement for the next quarter, the one we're in, and that'll take us to a 15 basis point profit, all other things being equal, and that's assuming we don't do anything on the cost line below. Let's just look at personnel. And in doing that, I had a conversation with several C-level people, and they said, what we'd really like to do is break our people productivity-wise into 3 groups: the top tier, kind of the middle tier, and the bottom tier. And on the top tier, how do we get more? How do we nurture? How do we reward? How do we celebrate their success? Because they're all people doing great work in this environment. In the middle tier, can we level them up and get them to that top tier or approach it? And on the bottom tier, kind of bifurcate it into 2 things. Let's set some performance expectations and say, to be here, you have to be able to at least achieve X. And if not, we're going to have to find a way to just part friends, because you've got to meet the minimum. So you have 3 tiers here, the bottom tier broken into help manage somebody up, and if they can't, the consequences will be there. And to do it with transparency, visibility, and action. So actually, 3 specific C-level people at a different lender said, it would be great if there was something like a FICO score to do this. And if you remember, FICO score is pretty easy. It's transparent, it's visible, and initiator for action. If you have an 850 FICO score, you are in the top tier. If you have 720, it's a solid performer. 620 is workable, but it's in the bottom side, and 510 is the lowest. And that FICO score is comprised of 5 different components, all of which have substantial predictive ability in determining what the likely outcome of that credit would be. And certainly you can manage. A good loan officer can work someone with a 620 or a 510 and say, here's what you need to do to improve in order to get credit. Well, the same thing is true with employees, products, and processes. We'll talk about employees in this time just because it's the time we have. So coming out of this discussion with 3 C-level people, we came up with this TVI score: transparent, visible, and initiator of action. And the initiator of action is really important because the score by itself is so what? But by breaking this into tiers, you get the initiation of what needs to be done. Celebrate the top, level up the second tier, segment the bottom tier into those that can possibly get into that second tier, and the lowest performers, be fair, but be firm. You've got to perform or not. And we came up with a score that said 100 is average for the company. The absolute average of the company is 100, and that means for everybody, If you're at 200, your score is considerably more productive than someone at 100. And that score is comprised for originators of volume, best efforts margin, concessions, cures, success factor, meaning pull-through, speed to close, and complexity. And complexity includes the credit box. It includes the source of income, self-employment, the type of loan, the type of transaction, the type of collateral, the type of waivers that may be there, the source of the data, and all that computes to a complexity score which is centered around 100. The most complex loans are 150, the least complex loans are about 70. So Tom, that's a little bit of the story we talked about coming up with the score. And I'll stop there and say if you have any observations or comments or questions, and then we'll push on.
Yeah, well, it's really, I like the approach. The FICO for operational folks, is it for all departments in operations, or is it focused on just the underwriters, or where are you looking for these opportunities?
Yeah, so we're scoring producers, AEs for TPOs. We're scoring brokers, correspondent lenders. We're scoring individual loan officers, underwriters, processors, closers. Basically, anybody that's in the production of loans can be scored.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and as we have, 100 is average. 200 means that particular Joe Jones is twice as productive as average. And the person at the bottom, 25, that's 1/4 of the average performance in terms of productivity. Thought about as another way, Joe Jones is 8 times as effective as Mary Miller. And that is something that you really have to manage in this environment. So let's first look at producers. What you're seeing is a chart that has the cumulative revenue, gain on sale plus retained fees plus MSR, aggregated but anonymized for a couple of our lenders who are kind enough to let us use their data, but it's all anonymized, but the facts are the actual facts. And you'll see the dark blue is the top tier. And the interesting thing about that, if you see that little gold line going in the middle of the screen, half of the revenue for the company was produced by those individuals, not the volume. We're concerned about revenue. Half the revenue was produced by about 12 people. The second tier, those 23 people that you see in that darker green.
Just to be clear on that, sorry, Jim, just to be clear on that, that stack of top tiers in the darker blue equate to that gold line in the middle, their production.
Yeah, that 50% where that intersects, that kind of parabolic line goes, those top producers did half the revenue in the company.
I see.
The next group did 30% of the revenue for the company. And I'll show you that a little more clearly, Tom, in just a second. And that lighter green, 20% of the revenue, the remaining 20% was done by the folks on the right. And what you don't see is I cut off the far right. This far right goes on for a pretty long time. And what that translates to is that top tier kind of nurture, recruit more, that middle tier. And the lenders that we use this on were transparent about this information with their employees. They didn't do it in public, but they sat down and said to the person, it's a little hard to read, but Jen Fowler, who is the pseudonym of the person that's right between the dark blue bar, the first one to the right is that second tier. The discussion with Jen was, Jen, you are so close to the top tier. If you had 1% more pull through and about 2% less concessions, you'd be on the top tier. And can I help you get there? And similarly for the rest of the people in that second tier. And that's how you level people up, whether it's producers, underwriters, operational people. On the right-hand side, the lenders set minimum performance standards and said, look, tough market, you got to perform. And this is what you have to do, and you have 90 days to do it. And if not, That 8 basis points of cost save comes from the people that did not meet those minimum standards. And interestingly enough, in segmenting this, you can see where the revenue components were. The last 5% was almost 30% of the people. The last 5% was almost 30% of the people, because you don't see the far right. And they had a chance to perform, but obviously they didn't. Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I was just going to say that even exceeds the 80-20 rule, but
it does. And the interesting thing on the very top, if you see that line in blue that says the transparency, visibility, and indicator of action score, the top producers were in that 368 TVI. In the middle, right around that average, was 100. And then on the right, you see the 82s, the 61s, the 44s, the 30s, the 21s. And if you continue to the right, which I don't view or aren't showing you, it got as low as 3. So 8 basis points of cost improvement came simply by holding people accountable and coaching them. But something interesting also happened. The top performers actually improved their performance and their TVI scores increased. About half the people in the middle increased their TVI scores also. And on the right-hand side, many of the people that were coached that said, you've got to meet this minimum, actually made it. So that 8 basis points is just cost that was taken out because the minimum performance standards weren't there. This is kind of a different look. This is volume and revenue, and it's the same information, just done a little bit differently. If you look at this as plots of land, and you look at the left-hand side, and then look at the right-hand side on the lower right bottom, all those small squares are individual producers. And if you think about how much energy and effort is spent on the right-hand side in the lower right quadrant, if you can imagine spending that much time and effort, or taking the time and the cost of what those individuals occupy, and fertilizing the plots in the middle and on the left-hand side, we have pretty good evidence from several lenders that by focusing those resources, particularly on the second tier to level them up, produces unbelievably productive results. This is getting into a little nitty-gritty. I know it's a little hard to read, but I'll tell you a story. This information was shared with the branches that you see here. And interestingly, the top branch, who wanted to continue to be the top, we measure this over 13 months and then rolling 4 months. So the top tier branch went from 176 to 197, they improved. And several of the other branches improved, and it's a tough market, some regressed, but that middle tier kind of continues to do really well. But the most telling thing is the bottom tier stayed the bottom tier. Despite having 8 or 9 months to improve, it just didn't happen. And ultimately, the decision was made to, at least on one of those branches, to move on and move out. But what you don't see here is that of that middle tier, what you're looking at here, some of them regressed, but once they saw they regressed, because we compute these scores every day, the action was, I don't want to be in the middle. So if I showed you the data today, that blue line goes down 3 branches deeper, which says if you show people where they stand, the competitive nature will actually self-manage up. And in many cases, once people knew what the minimum performance standard happened to be, some of them managed themselves out. So the transparency, the visibility, and the indicators of action really helped this lender manage sales cost. And then there's operations. And I'm going to show you the underwriting side of this. And some interesting things happened on the underwriting side. So this is a little busy, but the 3 different categorizations there are the underwriters the underwriters. And the 13-month score, despite the fact that it's a little more difficult out there, virtually all of the people in the top tier improved their scores because of the visibility. The top line there is Karen Fears, a pseudonym. Knew she was number one, wanted to stay number one. The lender here exposed the data again privately, and also explained that, you know, for Karen, her average complexity was 112. The average complexity for the company was 113. So Karen's doing pretty average loans. Every one of the top tier people improved their performance. In the middle tier, some improved, some didn't. And in the bottom tier, what you'll see is most of them did not approve. In fact, they regressed. So the decision on the underwriting side was, after exposing the data, the bottom tiers simply did not perform. And you go, well, Jim, that's great. What's a number? Here's the dollars this translates into. And ladies and gentlemen, if you take nothing away from this other than focusing on how much productivity matters to the operational cost of business, that $3,700 are people costs that are not sales oriented, please take note. Karen Fears did those number of decisions in 17 days around the average complexity with a 209 score, and we translated that to $236 of cost per decision made, simply by taking compensation, all benefits, dividing it by cases, and that gave us the cost per underwriting file. The middle tier, Abby, is a solid underwriter, a little bit slower, a little above average score, but $443 for the average. Kitty at the bottom, 38 days, more complex files, a 25 score and $664. And Nicole at the bottom, 26 days to make a decision, 109, significantly simpler files, and almost $1,000 a file. So, ladies and gentlemen, do you want your underwriting cost to be $236 a file, or $994 a file, or anywhere in between? This, because you have the most expensive operational person in the underwriting side, is significant. But there's an interesting story on Kitty. Her loan complexity was really high. Karen's was pretty average. So the lender used this information to flip around and said, what if we gave Kitty simpler files and gave Karen more difficult files using the complexity? And what happened is Karen's productivity stayed about the same in terms of units. Her speed slowed down a little bit because the files were more complex. Her complexity score went up to around 121. Her TVI score stayed about the same because she did a few less files, but they more complex. So she stayed number one. The cost per underwrite stayed number one. And significantly, the pull through on those most difficult files increased. So the benefit to the lender was having the most skilled underwriter deal with the most complex files increased the pull through, because sometimes Kitty couldn't find a way to make a file work and Karen could. The bonus was, if you looked at the data for Kitty as of a couple of days ago, her TVI score is in the 80s, so it's up a lot, is working well to do that. The cost to underwrite is coming down. But more importantly, the capacity of the whole system increased because the lender used these complexity scores to reallocate some of the more difficult files to the more skilled, underwriters. And the result was better pull through from underwriting, faster turnaround in general, and more satisfied employees. The difficult side is because volume fell, not everybody could continue, but the decisions that were made to release some of the underwriters were based on fact, were based on a relatively generous severance for the service, but the management of the costs is a reality that you just have to do. So Tom, I'd love your impression.
Yeah, well, first I'm struck by, using this objective method to rate. And certainly, I think, all of our clients look and rank, at least mentally, their best performers, their top performers, but it's hard to do it across multiple considerations and data. So being able to objectify it and use the actual data and performance data and pull that in and then score it, really gives you some fantastic transparency on your business costs. And as you can see, as I see here, you've got an underwriter that performs 2, 3, 4 times more efficient than each of the subsequent tiers. And, that, in my mind, it's of course hugely impactful. And I think probably in the minds of our client business owners and managers that the ability to have that objectivity and that transparency is fantastic. But hey, that can't be for free. I mean, how do you bring this data together? It must take months to pull it all and bring it together.
Well, Tom, that's an interesting question. One of the things you're looking at here is a product that we developed, and we implemented it with a lender literally last week that wanted to get especially the TBI scores. Signed on Tuesday, operational on Friday. And it's because it's totally integrated to Encompass. It's just a flip on the APIs and turn it on. For other LOSs, as long as the API access is there or a flat file access is there, it's as fast as you can get the flat file. And for some lenders, including our MCT partners, if you want to do this just once on a flat file, or if it's Encompass, we can turn it on, turn it off really fast. You're talking about next week to be able to get this type of data.
So to be clear, you could engage with a client and within a week's time frame be able to give them actionable data on their operational performance or whatever area that they want to focus on, or each of multiple areas they may want to focus on.
Yeah, everything you've seen so far would be operationalized in a couple days.
And how invasive is the process?
It's a API connection, Tom, on Encompass. So it's simply access to the Encompass APIs, whitelist, activate, make sure the mapping is there in a configurator, and it's a cloud-based product. It literally is up and running in a couple days. It's that fast.
Yeah, it sounds non-invasive and a quick path to early results. And you said that with Encompass that you've got a API or you have a fast way of pulling that data through, maybe I don't know, an API or SDK. How about other, we've got clients on multiple LOS platforms or systems of record.
If the API access is exposed, the data set on this is fairly slim, and at worst, it can be a daily file. So we can consume data either through API or just a daily transmission for non-Encompass. And the Encompass integration is full. It's literally turn it on, map it, with the configurator for any custom fields, and you're done.
Fantastic. Well, tell us more.
Okay. So there's a couple other things that came out of this that I think are worthwhile based upon productivity. The first is that because the underwriting process and the allocation of the more difficult files improved turnover, or pull-through, we also looked at things like STIPs and how good were the files coming out. And there was a palpable increase in the quality because, number one, people knew that was being measured. And number two, the more skilled underwriters who worked the more difficult files could anticipate what might be necessary to get that file purchased if it was going to a correspondent. So some of the downstream benefits were really pretty interesting. We took the originator data and pulled off the bottom 50%, took the numbers off and showed it to operational management and said, could you please mark the originators that struggle and clog up your system? And one took a big red marker, and it literally was the names on here, but there was just a listing of the names. So we kind of took from the light green all the way to the right. And the production executive said, my God, all these people are difficult. And took a big red pen and just circled the right-hand side of that. So we had a discussion, and the thing was, look, when you're not producing, you're not necessarily as skilled, and it has an impact on productivity that is not just on the originator side, it's on the operational side. So that was another interesting learning from this.
What, Jim, from the specific engagements that you've had in deployments with our mutual clients or with others, how about a little you've given some anecdotal feedback, a little bit more of kind of the performance proof or the existence proof from this and what's occurred.
Yeah, so the lender that I spent a little bit more time with, and we pushed this at the beginning of the second quarter, wanted to achieve 20 basis points on their volume in the next quarter, the one that's closing. The initial look is that we're going to get 21 better, and the volume is about the same. So it's a meaningful increase. It will go from a mild profit to, in this market, what would be considered to be a top tier profit, but it's going to have a 30 handle on the profitability. And that, I think, is the biggest reason to manage, because it's a tough market, and the choice is whether you give those profits back or not. One of the things that lender asked for is, we didn't want to necessarily cut capacity because there's always the chance that volume will come back. So in this case, showing another way that this lender took these top tiering scores and said, if I just looked at the top people, what's the capacity for files over this period of time? So build a capacity model that said, I want to have 4,000 units of capacity, which shows right there in the middle is the underwriting talent that needed to be retained. Perhaps retain an extra individual too for the right reasons. But the other thing that was pretty interesting on this is, because of the visibility of this and people know they're being measured, what you measure is what you get. So the productivity of the team actually went up. The complexity of the loans in aggregate actually went up. In part, it's because it's a more difficult environment and people are perhaps taking on loans that are more difficult because they have the capacity. But if you look at the right-hand side of this, anything in blue in terms of speed to decision is above average, anything in red is below average. And what you can see is that the top people have the top scores, the fastest speed through, and ultimately their capacity increased simply because, first of all, they wanted to improve, and secondly, the process side of this was also looked at, because in talking with the underwriters, one of the things that the leadership did is say, look, how can we make this process easier, better? How can we help you improve? And how can we measure it? And that's one of the benefits that came out of this. So this is kind of the end result, and it's pro forma for this quarter. And the reason I make that point is this is something you can do today. This is something, this concept you can do, simply on your own if you want. It's a big spreadsheet exercise, but this is not a difficult concept. to start with profit-driven lending and just say, I'm going to control my costs. The particular lenders that we looked at got their 18 to 21 basis points that they were targeting simply because they measured what mattered, which was the personnel cost. So this particular exercise I'm showing you only looked at originators and underwriters because that's where the highest cost was. As we're going forward in this quarter, we're looking at processors, we're looking at product, we're looking at speed to close and pull through because of the hedge costs. So there's a lot more to do. You start with small bite-sized pieces, but this is what profit-driven lending really looks like. And to be profit-driven, you want to really just commit to aggressive productivity management for every team member, because 2/3 of your costs are compensation. And you're looking for this aha moments. It's that leverage point to manage profitability, productivity, and cost. For instance, one aha moment was, we can now see the complexity of what the underwriters are doing. And some of the less productive underwriters were dealing with much more complex files. So let's reallocate how we measure complexity and who we assign files for. That was an aha moment. Another aha moment was, and I didn't show you the particular graphic, but one aha moment was 3% of our revenue come from 15% of our lowest producers. And would it be easier to get that 3% of revenue picked up by levering up or managing up that middle tier versus trying to work with those that 15% of the people give 3%? And Tom, I think you're exactly right on the aha moment. And lastly, it's tough out there, and proactivity is hard. These are really tough decisions because they involve people. It is a really difficult decision because it has a human element to it. But by being transparent, visible, setting expectations, it really ensures that as a lender, you can prosper in a very difficult moment, in a very difficult time, and give everybody a chance, because nothing I've said here says do something right away. Everything I've said is be transparent, make it visible, indicate the action that's going to happen, and give everybody on the team the opportunity to make the team. But if not, as managers, our job is to hold our teams accountable. And sometimes that means making difficult decisions. So Tom, that's what I wanted to cover, and let you conclude. And then I have one last slide on how anybody that's interested might get more information.
Yeah, let me just draw out a couple of points there. First, let me point the attendees to the question window on your control panel on the screen. If you have any questions you want to discuss before we close out, feel free to send those. We've gotten a couple of requests already for copies of the presentation, Jim. I think you're okay to send that out, so we'll be planning to send that to attendees, if that's all right, Jim.
Absolutely.
I particularly, like your last point on proactivity, because even if you're not in a position right now where, well, first, there's not a lender out there that couldn't use an extra 20 basis points. Not that you're promising that, but that as an indicator of the kind of performance you can see from using this kind of methodology and tool is certainly compelling. But on that proactive point, even if you're not ready to take some of those actions today, identifying those top performers and being able to have some of the other tiers model those performance, and using that transparency and objectivity, is compelling and seems intuitive as a great approach to strengthen your business and control your costs. Maybe one question I'd have, Jim, is there are other business intelligence tools, some built into the LOSs out there. you know, there are approaches there. This is one that I've seen that really gives you a comprehensive and measured view. You know, what stands out for you on this process or approach uniquely when you look at it in line with other business intelligence tools that might somehow score your productivity or your, you know, your operational performance?
No, that's a great point, Tom. And look, what you have here is some thought leadership from people in the industry that go through and say, I want something that's really simple. I appreciate dashboards, I appreciate that, but these are tough times. I don't have time to interpret the data. What I really want to know is, how can I measure this? How can I make it transparent to people? And how can I make it actionable? And I want to do it fast. I don't want to spend time developing it. I don't want to spend time looking at stuff. Tell me what I need to know. And the reaction to this transparency, visibility, indicator of action, initiation of action, is really the defining difference. It's based upon feedback from C-level people that said, this is how I want to manage. And we cut through everything. You notice everything you looked at was not very complex. It was simply color coded, and the common elements are this TBI score. So, you know, certainly you can do it on a spreadsheet. Certainly you can do it with other tools. And our purpose of sharing and providing the deck is, we want you to be successful no matter what. If you want to do it quickly and you want to do it using what's available and literally out of the box, you know, this cloud-based service rescores every day. It's ready to use 48 hours with Encompass, as fast as we get the APIs and the flat files otherwise. And lastly, you know, some of our partners have said, I'd just like to get a sense and do this once. So from a consulting side, we give you that hard fact, and our job is to help you as lenders become more successful, and lots of different ways to use this capability. So if you want to use it and just essentially recreate it, we're going to give you the deck because we want you to be more successful. We'd love your business, love the partnership, but most importantly, just want you to be successful. So I hope these ideas help you commit to action, be proactive, and move forward. So Tom, thank you.
Jim, thank you. Before we wrap it all up, I just bring one more question into the mix. It's maybe a multi-part question. First, to let everybody know, we are recording this, and we will send out the presentation to the attendees and the access to the recording. Jim, one of our attendees in particular, a friendly, good friend attendee, says, do you have similar presentation on TPO? And do you consider the number of touches per file? And let's see, sorry, my eyes are a little dim. Lastly, the capacity ops report, can you break it down by product type based on the underwriting delegation?
So the answer to all of those is yes. It looks at the both TPOs, it looks at the AE as well as the broker. So instead of scoring branches in a distributed retail environment, LO and the branch, the TPO piece looks at AE and the particular broker or correspondent. Didn't show you, but this computes the same scoring elements by product. So one can evaluate the elements of a product to determine whether, you know, which products are really being used the most and which have the most efficiency, and which, in terms of the people touching things through the stack or the waterfall from front end to closing, you know, the productivity numbers are there by product, by channel, by branch, by broker, etc. And you've seen a small piece of this, but everything revolves around trying to look at those TBI elements, particularly complexity, speed, and success factor pull through, because, you know, 1 out of 4 loans, 75% pull through means 1 out of 4 loans fails. And it is shocking to see how little is done to prevent or recover, those loans, particularly withdraw or close for incomplete. So that's a long answer, Tom, but the answer is this is very granular, and you can take it down to show me this loan officer, show me their products, show me their pull-through, show me their margin, show me their scores.
Excellent. Very impressive. And Jim, you certainly have the chops as an industry expert to present here. Very happy to have you on this webinar for our clients and prospective clients. We'll have Jim's contact information available as well. And I hope that the audience has enjoyed this presentation. Look forward to hearing back from you on it. Thanks everybody for attending.
And Tom, thank you so much for hosting, and thanks to our MCT partners for hosting. Really appreciate the opportunity, and have a great day. Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.